Dallas, Texas, in this big old Airbnb that I'm staying in with Lily May Band, and they're all out recording an album, and I am all alone in the spooky Airbnb. But at least life is beautiful, and all you need is love. And I'm going to cook them some tacos for when they get home later tonight. So I got some ingredients for Milly Raccoon's world famous tacos. Things I pretty much always like to have in my tacos are jalapeno, yellow squash, Brussels sprouts, sweet potato, and black beans. Usually I would soak overnight some dried beans and cook them, but we're on the road right now. So I got canned beans, and this is my favorite hot sauce, the Cholula green pepper hot sauce. And I like white corn tortillas. And I'll show you how I chop everything up and time the cooking. So as with almost anything I cook involving vegetables, I start with onion because I want the onion to fry up and get browned and crispy and sweet and caramelized. And I used to always chop onion really big and just have these big onion chunks. But the past couple days or so, I don't know, maybe longer than that, I've been really into cutting up onions very small and fine, even if I'm going to cook them. And I say even if I'm going to cook them because a little bit of this onion I'm going to set aside to chop up and have raw as an optional topping. And the rest of it I'm going to chop up very fine to fry in the pan. And so I just chopped up these very thin slices and then chopped them the other way. And you know, onions do half or more of the work for you by already being separated into little sections. So it's very finely chopped now. So I got the onions a-going in the pan. And some people like to chop all their ingredients up first and then cook after as a separate activity. But I really like the art of chopping as you go and just chopping things in the right order so that they all cook right. And I feel like it saves time and it's more efficient use of your stove energy and your energy and everything. So as the onions are going, I'm going to move to the next thing that'll take the longest to cook, which I've decided this time is the sweet potato. I want to make sure it gets really nice and soft. So I've got this big fat sweet potato, going to cut the ends off and compost them. And it can be kind of dangerous to cut a big fat sweet potato, so I'm going to kind of cut it diagonally in these small slices so I don't have to cut through the whole big fat sweet potato and risk chopping my hand or something. This one's pretty easy to cut, I think, because this is a nice sharp knife and maybe it's a pretty fresh sweet potato. So I'm going to cut these up pretty small, but not that small. I don't want them to fall apart really. It's okay if they do and you have kind of a mashed sweet potato hash for your tacos. Tacos are a pretty forgiving food to make, but I'm making them about the size of some dice with a little variation here and there. So now my onions are getting nice and gnarly, all browned and crispy. And I forgot to tell you that I put oil in the pan. I figured that was obvious, but maybe not. And so yeah, put some oil in the pan so that your things don't get all dry and burned. It's a great little vessel for frying things. And next I'm going to put the sweet potatoes on over the top of the onions, just to give the onions a little more time to be in direct contact with the pan before I stir them all up. See, they're just resting on top of the onions. I haven't stirred them in yet. And so now I can chop up my next longest thing, which you may or may not have guessed is going to be the Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts take a really long time to soften and get well cooked, in my opinion, so that's what I'm going to chop up next while the sweet potatoes kind of steam on top of the onions. So the Brussels sprouts, I'm going to cut off all their ends because that part is too tough. And kind of like how I am with onions now and a lot of other vegetables, I cut things a lot finer than I used to just because I really want things to cook well in a slightly smaller amount of time. It'll just take so long to cook well when it's cut big. So, you know, the medium-sized ones I'll cut in maybe fourths. Bigger ones maybe 6 packs of Brussels sprouts, and then they should cook pretty nicely and be real tender and just fall apart in your mouth. Brussels sprouts are one of my very favorite vegetables, maybe my favorite. So now the Brussels sprouts are in with the sweet potatoes and onions, and I stirred it all up because the onions were ready to be dispersed throughout rather than cooking on the bottom. And I used to always cook with a lid over whatever I'm frying to get it steamed and cooked faster. And maybe ideally that does help keep in some of the nutrients, because a lot of the nutrients will steam out as you cook it, kind of like when you're steeping tea, you want to keep your tea covered so that the health benefits of your tea don't steam out. But I've also just read for different art of cooking tradition things that they'll cook and brown and just get really flavorful and perfect if you leave them open to the air. So I'm going with tradition these days and cooking them without the lid. And because I'm not a very experienced cooking show recorder yet, I forgot to mention that I'm adding bell pepper to this. I love to put bell peppers in my tacos. I don't really discriminate in color. I like all the colors of bell pepper, and usually green is cheapest, like by a lot. They're actually, I've heard, all the same pepper. It's just different amount of times they've hung on the vine, so it's more expensive as they change through the colors. But I think green peppers are very delicious, and so that is the kind I'm using in my tacos. That's one of my favorite pizza toppings too, green pepper and mushroom. Sometimes I put mushroom in my tacos, especially shiitake mushrooms, but I'm not doing that today. I have a lot of nice other hearty proteins like the sweet potatoes and a little leftover surprise that you'll see later. So I'm just going to keep chopping these up into dice like many of the other veggies. Now that my green bell peppers are in there sizzling, I'm going to chop up my other type of pepper, the jalapeno pepper. And we might start choking in here, so be prepared because these are spicy. So this guy I'm going to chop up real fine. Just open it up here. Some people get rid of the seeds in the middle, either because they don't like to eat them or because they're spicy. Seeds of peppers are spicy when you have a spicer pepper. It's one of the spiciest parts. So I don't always get rid of those, especially if I want them to be really spicy, but I think this time I'm going to. It's just my intuition, and I'm following the winds of inspiration here. So there's going to be a little bit of seeds left that get in there, and so that'll keep it interesting. So I'm going to chop this up very fine, almost like I'm chopping up garlic, because you don't want people to get a really spicy chunk of jalapeno in their mouth. And it'll be cooked, so it won't be as bad as if it were raw, but some people are sensitive. And I think this is a spicy one because I'm already choking on it, and I can taste a little piece. Yeah, this is a really spicy one. I don't even know if I should put the whole thing in, but everyone I'm cooking for is like under 50, and that doesn't always correspond with being able to handle spice, but it often does. I think this is a pretty spicy crew, and they'll be able to handle it, especially if it's cooked. So the jalapenos have gotten in there and gotten all stirred around. I'll probably start choking soon. And I'm going to move on to the yellow squash. Usually with a yellow squash, you're going to have a fat end and a thin end. And so I cut it a little differently depending on the end. So the thin end, I'll cut them into the circles and then cut it in half. You can stack them or line them up. And then on the fat end, I'll cut them into a circle and maybe end up cutting it twice each direction, like that. So the yellow squash is in there frying now, and I've got this beautiful red tomato, bloop, 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 and I'll probably put half of it in to cook with the rest and keep half of it for the toppings later. And as you see, I'm not cutting up the toppings yet, like the onions, the raw tomato, because I don't want them to kind of go stale and dry while I cook everything. I want them to be really fresh, so I'll cut those when it's just about time to serve. And I'm cooking, when you cook tomatoes, they really start to fall apart, and no matter what you do, so it doesn't really matter how you cut it, but I'm cutting them kind of small, dicing them like everything else, just because I like cutting with this knife. I don't know. Chop, chop, chop. Really doesn't matter with tomatoes. So I don't always even spice my taco mixes, believe it or not. Even though usually in cooking, spicing is one of my favorite parts of being a genius gourmet chef. But there's something about the fact that you add so many toppings, and you add, maybe some people add cheese and hot sauce and everything, and I just find the natural flavors of the vegetables go really well under the toppings. But this time I am gonna spice it. I have salt. These are just of the things that were here, what I decided to put in there. Salt, red pepper, chili powder, slap ya mama powder, onion powder, and garlic powder. And that should do it. So I poured them all on top, and I'm just gonna stir it all in. The onion powder and garlic powder ended up being empty, but that's fine, because first of all, there's onions in here. We don't need onion powder. And it's not like we're making pasta or something. We don't need garlic. This is tacos. We need garlic tacos. So, this is perfect spice mix. And normally I would have added the beans by now so that they could get in on that spicing. But guess what? This Airbnb Kitchen provides 6 fabulous wine openers of different types. However, there is no can opener. So since I have my beans in a can, and I don't usually, I didn't think about a can opener, and usually there would be one in a kitchen, so I'm gonna either turn off my vegetables and go out and get one. But I'm in Dallas, Texas, and it's nighttime, and I don't know a whole lot about this area, and I don't have a black belt in karate yet, so I might just ask the people I'm cooking for to pick up a can opener on the way back, and I'll add those beans for them later, and they'll get enough spice, it'll be great. Remember when I told you there'd be a surprise ingredient? The surprise is white potatoes from breakfast. I don't always add white potatoes to tacos, but they're very delicious in there, and I love using up leftovers. Now check this part out. It's crazy. You never want to just have a plain corn tortilla all unwarmed and uncooked. They're like basically raw and dry, and so you want to heat them, and you could either put together a pan with some oil and heat them, and that's a very delicious way to prepare them. But another fun way is to put them right over your flame. So I'm going to turn it down just so that the flame isn't actually licking above the grate of the grill, and just slap that baby right on there. Let it cook for a few seconds. Flip it. I'm gonna get some on your little grill protectors, but you can clean that off later. So you just keep flipping it so it doesn't get too burned on either side, but it'll start to puff up and get nice and toasty and warm, and it'll be a really fun way to heat your tortillas. Make sure you don't burn yourself, obviously. I've got a can opener from the studio, and the beans have now been added. The day is saved. We have some heated up tortillas.
I helped with that.
Frank flipped some of the tortillas.
I helped flip them.
We got Joffrey opening wine. We're gonna have a bunch more people coming and eating. We got the fixins. Dun, dun, dun. It's all ready to go. Do, do, do.